mental health, emotional health, physical health, deeper understanding, actionable takeaways to improve your quality of life. We're the Level Up Guys.
Even guys can have emotionally literate conversations about these hard topics, and we're the guys that are going to prove it. Let's level up.
What's up, you guys? I'm Billy with Level Up Guys. I'm here with Jarrett. Today, we're talking about really continuing on with our relationship series, conflict, and specifically communication during conflict. Now, this can be like a really broad thing because there's a lot of conflicts that we can deal with, but specifically to relationship-wise, Jarrett, like, I guess first, what's the definition of conflict in this container, in this environment of relationships, conflict?
Yeah, so I really like a guy, Jason Gaddis. He runs the Relationship School and has a great podcast with, we're always shouting out podcasts and the resources that we're drawing upon. So I want to give him props. He has a book that is about communicating through conflict in your high stakes relationships. And I really like his definition, which is conflict is any rupture or disconnection or unresolved issue between two people or inside of you. And I actually really appreciate that last part because oftentimes we think about, conflicts between people, right? But if there is something within us that is creating discomfort, or, it might be that we have some friction between belief systems that are going on. Or like if we are not speaking up and bringing conflict, healthy conflict, or doing it in a healthy way to the person that it's relevant for, then internal conflict shows up because of self-abandonment. And that always brings me to a quote. We were chatting all the time during the pandemic in quarantine, and you would see when we Zoomed or FaceTimed, like I had all kinds of sticky notes around the walls and just everywhere. I probably had 50 up at one time. And one of them was this, and this I think really resonates. And it's, if you avoid conflict to keep the peace, you start a war within. And that one was so meaningful to me because my habit previous to kind of doing the work was to avoid conflict in relationships. That started a war within.
It sounds like a redirection. Instead of having a conflict with an external, then you internalize it and you then become conflicted. But the energy goes somewhere, just doesn't dissipate into nothing.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right.
It's an uncomfortable place to be. I wonder, so tell me this, if one is feeling conflicted, I don't know if I should go this way, that way, speak my mind, not speak my mind, do this or that. Is it as heightened if somebody else is involved in the conflict? Because now you have two energies and two emotions.
Yeah, great question. I think I would say that it is likely not as heightened. And that is the reason that we keep the conflict inside, right? Because when we are around somebody else and in conflict with them, we get more activated and we're kind of wired for it.
We're wired to be activated because it feels like an uncomfortable place to be that you don't want to be in. Like, why is it so challenging?
Yeah, well, so there's the part of us that is, as humans, and people have heard me say this before, and I'll say it 1,000 times, we are social pack mammals. And we are, through our evolution, wired to be uncomfortable when there's disconnection or conflict, which, like, that physical discomfort is essentially to encourage reconnection. Right? Like that's the functional use of it. In the same way that guilt might show up as a discomfort to encourage relationship repair or to like realign with our values, the functional use of this discomfort is to try to get us to reconnect because, that's how we survived throughout evolution as social mammals.
Yeah. But you get kicked out of the tribe. You're probably not going to make it on your own. You had to assimilate into all that.
Yeah.
So that leads me to believe that like a destination wouldn't be like no conflict, internal or external, because this is a signal apparently, right? For some sort of an action to be able to maintain connection. But then why is it so challenging to be like productive in your communication and elegant in what you're saying when we're in that zone. This seems like the hardest time. If it's so important, why isn't it easy to like resolve it?
Yeah, I mean, it. Well, let's first just clarify that things that are important don't have to be easy, right?
Okay.
But I know that you kind of say that playfully, but
Yeah.
or I respond playfully with that. But I think to answer your question is that um, we don't have great models of people healthily navigating through conflict and coming out the other side. Particularly, older generations didn't really have a lot of the knowledge and tools to be able to actually use it, um, use language that is going to be less activating for the other person, and to be able to recognize within, like, where is my activation coming from? Like, they can recognize, like, oh, I'm in it now, I'm feeling activated, my nervous system's been taken over, but it's your fault, um, and yeah, previous generations that so I don't know about for you, but for me, my parents dealt with conflict between them behind closed doors, and so I actually never really got to see conflict being navigated, and even if they weren't navigating it perfectly, to see the process of them, you know, being disconnected and then being reconnected. It just kind of happened outside of my awareness, and of course, there were a couple times where, as a kid, I probably picked up on something, but yeah, I mean, so the modeling wasn't there.
Right.
Oh yeah, and I mean, so what about for you? I mean, like, did you have models of how people manage conflict? Would you say?
Um, yeah, I mean, if you ask me that question without being like a positive model, yeah, I think, if there's, some sort of like yelling, screaming, not picking your battles, like in a
Mm,
relationship wise, kind of, there has to be some sort of, and I've been unsuccessful in relationships, so I'm probably not the best one to say, but it has to be some sort of a compromise because you can't have it like all the time your way, so that being conflicted, considering the other person in a loving way and recognizing their needs too, can avoid some of the conflicts to begin with.
mm,
But no, I would say it was more like silence is never good, yelling is never good,
mm.
disconnection, unless it's like mindful disconnection. You take 5 minutes, take a couple deep breaths,
Yeah,
reconvene later, something like
sure.
that. Um,
Yeah,
but then, I mean, oftentimes too, I feel like there's a suppression of that feeling because we don't want to create a conflict. We don't want to like rock the boat. We don't want to like maybe even speak up for ourselves. I've gotten in trouble sometimes, you know, for what I was saying, right or wrong, where it was like interpreted as like, like a conflicting thing or something like that. Um,
yeah.
but and sometimes you don't say anything. Sometimes you do say something. It's hard to um, navigate that. So give me some examples of where a conflict would be like a good thing if recognized in a relationship, like a loving romantic relationship.
Yeah. Well, so I think it's important to say, uh, you know, conflict is going to happen between any time you have two people close, right? Or like in a close relationship of some kind. And that could be a business partnership. It could be child and parent. It could be romantic, any form. There's going to be conflict. There's going to naturally be difference and disagreement. And the problem isn't necessarily that there's conflict. The problem is the meaning making around it that people have. And so, if, for example, a couple that if there's two people in a relationship and they avoid conflict, okay, there may not be any conflict shown in the relationship, but you can bet that both are having a war within, as the quote says, right? And I think an important thing to recognize is that the couple that doesn't have conflict in their relationship um, actually doesn't have a container that can hold conflict. Like, their relationship hasn't gone through adversity or the kind of a disconnection or a disruption, um, and then found security in the fact that, oh, okay, like we are, we regained connection. Like it's okay if we go through adversity, right? So, and our nervous system only learns that through experience. We've called out Mark Groves for his podcast and his content a bunch. And so he talks about this, that like essentially a relationship that hasn't navigated conflict is way more delicate than a relationship that has, because, and what he says that I think is really insightful is that, secure attachment, and we'll have other episodes on attachment styles, so I'm not going to get super into it, but secure attachment comes from a cycle of connection, disconnection, repair, connection, repeat. And over time, we get conditioned, our nervous system gets conditioned to believe that disconnection will lead to repair, which will lead to reconnection, as opposed to feeling like disconnection might lead to abandonment, or it might mean that, there's something wrong with me, or fill in the blank.
Right. Right. I wonder if other words that are synonymous with conflict, because I believe even outside of a relationship, as a human being, challenging things make us stronger and give us perspective and gratitude and resilience, and we maybe build like a little bit of a callus to challenging things. That's kind of what I'm interpreting from what you're saying in a relationship. If you have challenges and conflict, having gone through those experiences, you learn, you can come out the other side of it, and you have a place for it. It's the same. Like I do very challenging workouts. I teach Pilates. Yoga is very challenging. It's kind of like a conflict for me to like have to manage that situation with grace and ease, and and whilst kicking my own butt, because I like that feeling.
Yeah. And I mean, you think you raise a really good point that, or you're making a nice connection here that I want to think through a little bit. So you were saying how this repeated cycle of going through conflict or going through challenge develops, has the potential to develop a callus to it a little bit. And I think, that, yes, that definitely helps us navigate hard things in the future if we, get somewhat thicker skin. But I think that there's also a trade-off for that callus at the same time. And the trick, which I certainly have not mastered, and, much respect to the guru who has, is how do I not let conflict harden me? How do I just continue to stay soft, essentially, and stay open to the emotional experience that conflict brings, and recognize that, like, it's okay that I'm having these feelings, and make new, like, develop new belief systems around myself about what it means when I'm in a situation that brings this up. And I mean, like I said, still working on that. And in some cases, just to navigate life and to be able to do things, I've had to harden, right? So I definitely, that experience resonates with me. But every time I check in with my heart, and, every time I, like listen or read resources, it is all about, like, how do we maintain vulnerability and start to, like, recognize that, yeah, it's freaking hard, but, like, I'm going to stay soft through this.
Soft? How do you mean soft? So
Great.
I think I'll give you an example. Like when I'm taking class in my studio, a hot Pilates class, I work very hard on the class. I feel great after. I know it's great for my body.
Yeah.
But you have to be vulnerable to be in that position, because I'm, red-faced. I'm sweating out of my eyeballs. I'm like barely can breathe. I'm in it. I'm working really hard. I own the studio, and I'm the senior teacher, so I know people are like watching and seeing how I do things for like good technique. I'm not trying to keep my composure. I'm not trying to keep like I'm lying.
Yeah.
I'm crawling. I'm hanging on for dear life. So there's some vulnerability built into being willing to go to that place where it's so uncomfortable.
Yeah. I mean, I think asking it's a great request for a either reframe or a definition of what I mean by soft. I appreciate that. So when I say that, I mean, let me see if I can work my way to it. I don't have the
Cool.
short answer, but let me see if I can work my way to it. And you bring me back if I am not doing it. All right. Okay. So what do I mean by that? I think that when it's a really typical tendency for when people go through adversity, whether it's relational or otherwise, we develop, pretty rigid coping strategies or pretty rigid, essentially like protective or defense mechanisms to get through the experience, and it gets locked into our nervous system. And that type of rigidity gets us through the situation there, but it's not the only choice that our bodies and brains could have made, but it's just the one that kind of had the quickest firing connections, or that the environment, leaned us towards the most, right? And it gets really stuck. And so that type of rigidity does not ultimately serve us long term. That's why I say there's a cost to the callous, because there are going to be other times that it's really even hard to recognize that I'm calloused, or that I have hardened in some way, or that, and when I say that, like, I've become rigid in terms of my approach and the way that I make meaning of other people's approaches and mine.
Mm-hmm.
Like, have you ever been in the situation or been around somebody who tells you how to do something that they've never done, but like they seem really certain about what you should be doing?
Yeah. Oh, often.
Yeah. Yeah. And so for something like that, it's typically coming from a place of, a non-aggressive place typically, but like a place from that person of like, well, this is what served me, so let me share this advice with you.
Right.
Right. But really that's potentially a form of their approach with all of their life's history, that has guided them to that point. And who knows if that's serving them well or not, but it's just the thing that's locked into their nervous system.
Right.
Right. And I mean, as a therapist, I have to be really careful about that, of not assuming that my protective mechanisms and coping strategies and defense mechanisms have been the thing that ultimately is right for somebody else. Right. I can put things out there and see what resonates. I can also be a really great listener and start to help other people try to identify what they're what's working for them and what isn't working for them. All right. So looping back around, it's the rigidity that develops subconsciously that can be the issue. And I think when I say soft, what I mean is flexible, maybe.
Yeah. There you go.
Right. It's like, how do I stay dynamic and situational and unassuming? And because, I mean, all our nervous system is doing and our brain is doing is just taking guesses, right, about what is going on. And I mean, so for example, like if our history has led us to believe, before we get into a conflict with our loved one in the present moment, if our history has led us to believe that, our part in conflict means that like we're not worthy of connection, or that we're going to be abandoned, or that we're either not enough for somebody, that not good enough, or if our needs are too much for someone, then we're going to be too afraid to take ownership of what's ours to own, that are contributing factors to a conflict. And that is kind of a form of that rigidity that around like the story that we have. And, ultimately, if we're requiring our partners to fit into the reciprocal of our story of who we are in relationships, then we're actually putting limits on how we allow others to show up in relationships. And also, I mean, just out of confirmation bias, how we even see them showing up in the relationships, right? Like we're going to only be looking for the ways that justify our story or justify our pre-existing belief or narrative, and not seeing all of the other pieces.
Yeah, it seems like being open and staying adaptable and not being so rigid. Some of the takeaways from what you said. My dad used to tell me when I was a kid that it's not the strongest that survive, because that's the saying, only the strong survive, or the strongest will survive. He said it's not the strongest that survive, it's the most adaptable to change. And if you think about like evolution, I'm like, it seems to make a lot of sense. There's the adaptations to like climate and environment and tribes and groups. It's just not like the hammer and the nail and bang, bang going through it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I love that. I think that like, it's probably pretty clear to every listener or viewer that a brontosaurus was a lot stronger than an ape. Right. And so, but the apes survived, right? The humans or the mammals, right, survived because they were the adapters. And I've heard this, something similar in reference to like trees, right? Trees are meant to blow in the wind and be flexible because otherwise they would snap.
Yep, exactly right.
Yeah.
I was a garden designer, as you know, for a number of years. Worked in horticulture, and I love plants, and I planted a lot of trees. And if you plant a young tree, initially you want to put what's called guy wires on it. So you would put a little metal piece in the earth and then connect a wire to the tree nicely on three sides. So as a young tree, it wouldn't just go blown over by the wind. It would be a little bit stable.
Yeah.
But the key is, after a certain while, you have to take those off. Because it's the blowing of the wind, that stress and that tension and that resistance that creates a strong root. And so you have this awesome structure underneath that's taking up all the nutrients. But if you leave the guy wires on, it won't be challenged to grow at all. And it'll be like this flimsy little tree. But it's that resistance of, like you said, blowing in the wind, strong root structure. And that always correlates to like the top growth.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, so this will maybe align with your that job as well, or that career as well. And I mean, I'm not big into gardening. I do love the idea of it, but just in terms of practice, I'm not huge into it. But
yeah,
my wife really enjoys it, and I have a lot of friends who are really into it. And I frequently hear about or see them literally, going up to the plants and like moving them around with their hands, like kind of like messing with the leaves a little bit, and even, the trimming of some of the growth, right? That all is causing conflict within, the existence of the plant, right? Like it was just doing its thing, feeling great. And now another force comes here and is creating essentially friction or tension or, moving it around or cutting it. And that's actually what creates better and more sturdy growth.
absolutely. Yeah, pruning promotes growth. Even if you prune the roots, there's a technique called root pruning. We could go around the perimeter of a pretty small to medium sized tree and cut straight down in a circle in a nice diameter, and you root prune, and that invigorates growth.
Oh, that's crazy.
Yeah.
So it happens with the roots too.
Yeah. Just the same as you could like prune the top growth off, and you would promote new growth that way by creating that conflict, creating that thing. Yeah.
Nice. Well, and so, I mean, that also makes me think about how, some, like if we use our partners as like helpful gardeners, and we allow for that to kind of show up as, in our lives with the conflict, then like we could be like they could actually be contributing to our growth. Yeah.
Or lack thereof, because in both scenarios, it's a science.
Yeah.
If you prune a hydrangea at the wrong time of year, you will not get flowers that year. If you prune this way versus this way, you're dictating the direction of the growth of the next stem. So you could easily like kill a plant, kill a tree, or you could have like more flowers and more growth and more fruit from it, but It's a science to it. You have to be really considerate of what you're doing. That's it for today, you guys. Make sure to follow us. You can find us on all the major platforms. If you really like what you heard, maybe share it with a friend, share it with a buddy, maybe share it with an enemy, because we all need a little bit of love. We're going to level up together. See you next time.